Muddee. This was something experimental that Nintendo Handheld tried to do, and unfortunately it just didn't work as well as they thought, because it isn't explained all that well. The main problem is that the quote-unquote shadow weakness of Muddee is that you have to butt stomp him using the vines on the wall, which you are using to climb around in order to have this boss fight happen. It's an interesting gameplay change and something, that makes the boss fight a bit different from everything else. It's just that, again, the game has a shadow weakness, the game has a mechanic it's not telling you about, which actually makes doing the boss fight possible. See, the butt stomp is an ability that up until this point you would have no reason, or very few rare reasons, to actually know that it exists, which means that the way that you're supposed to beat the boss fight is a way that the game has not taught you or has not shown you at all throughout the entire game's runtime. The point of the boss fight is that you have to butt stomp Muddee from the top and not hit his spike ball on his bum, because he's a giant beaver. Thankfully, Muddee has 3 sides on which he's vulnerable, but considering his attack pattern is basically just spinning around the entire time at varying speeds, even just having that one side to deal with, even though it's spinning and spinning around, it can still be very dangerous because it seems like the hitbox is active most of the time, and even though you are more likely to hit a side that's vulnerable, because of the spinning thing, Nintendo Handheld has programmed the boss to be more protected than it actually should be. I don't think you can actually get a hit done on an angle, which kind of screws the entire multiple vulnerable points thing. Otherwise, Muddee's entire gimmick is that he spins, he runs around, which makes him slightly unpredictable, but you have a lot of space to work with, and you can almost always see Muddee so you're not getting killed by off-screen bullshit, because in his final form, Muddee moves pretty damn fast, so you have to be quick on the trigger. The unfortunate part is that it is very unlikely that you'll be able to get back into the boss fight if you take damage and fall off. Another case of this boss fight possibly being insta-fail, because if you take any damage at all, you get thrown off of the vines and back into the river that has a incredibly strong current. So strong that if you don't immediately, once you hit the water, jump back up onto the vines, then you are most likely going to have to redo the entire thing. The boss character design is not great. It's very generic. It's hard to tell what Muddee was supposed to be, and honestly, he kinda looks like a small turd, because he's just kind of like a brown tube with legs. It's very uninspired, it's very, 4 p.m. on a Friday looking. It just seems like Nintendo Handheld didn't put a lot of effort into trying to make this thing look like a beaver, and I know we're technically looking at Muddee from top down, but you can stylize the eyes, you can put some clothes on him, you can give him a stupid grin. Like, there's some things you can do. Just having black beady eyes is not going to work, and honestly, the character design is so confusing that if you look at it wrong, you could probably mistake his spiked butt as his face, because it's just, based on the way he moves and looks, it just kind of plays out like that. Muddee is not interesting, Muddee is not cool looking, and is not differentiated from much to actually make him stand out, which means he's gonna fall into the background, especially since, again, this thing was just obtusely difficult, sort of unfair against the player, has insta-fail mechanics, and is just kind of a big ball of irritation the whole way through. I think the unfortunate part about Nintendo Handheld from all these boss fights we've been seeing is that it just looks like they weren't able to work within the limitations of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Back in the day when we had the Genie final boss fight and all those Captain Syrup battles from Wario Land 1 and 2, they had some things going on, but it seems like the obligation to make more bosses hasn't translated into putting in the proper effort to make these guys interesting and satisfying combat encounters. And it just seems like most of what we're doing is fading into the background while we're just looking for the next chest, doing more exploration of Wario Land 3, which is a shame, because other than this, it's really overshadowing Nintendo Handheld's better points and not showing off how quality this studio can be.